'Tis I, your dear pal, King Chuck. I hope you're having a wonderful... I hope you had a wonderful week. The weekend is upon us. It's 55 degrees in Grand Rapids. Holy fucking shit. I just turned off the heater in my car. I got an early weekend. Yeah, I get to get off work at this time because we ran out of work. So I'm okay with that. I worked a little bit of overtime this week. And I get to go home and catch up on my sleep as soon as I'm done with this podcast. So let me tell you what happened a few nights. So yesterday I wanted to do a podcast. I did not get a chance to do it, but it was a good thing I did not. And I'll tell you why in a few minutes. So I woke up yesterday at like 2:30 in the morning. And I had to go out and, I had to get up and go pee. I did my job and urinated. And then what happened was after my urination was done, I went back to bed and I could not get back to sleep. My body was telling me, yeah, it's too close to wake up time, Chuck. Why would you want to go back to sleep? Yeah, it was like I knocked the tired out of me. So anyway, I went to work. I went to work and I was thinking about doing this podcast. Lo and behold, at the end of the day, I was tired enough to go back to, I was tired enough when I got home that at about just after 7 o'clock, I got Wheel of Fortune playing on TV and I fell asleep in the recliner. So about 7:15 I wake up and I'm like, So I ended up thinking to myself, I should probably go to bed, try to fight the sleepy, and I could not. I was drifting in and out of sleep for the next 45 minutes. I slept through Jeopardy, and I did catch the final Jeopardy. The final Jeopardy had to do with the name origin of Winnie the Pooh. Oh, just my luck. I'm next to a BMW, and it sounds like its muffler is going out. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like that joke I heard. I had a friend who worked at BMW and just simply quit. He gave no indication as to why. Get it? Because BMW drivers don't, tend to be the most douchebaggy of all. Anyway, so the rest of the story was that the rest of the story was, by the way, the final Jeopardy of last night's Jeopardy was the name origin of Winnie the Pooh. And Winnie the Pooh was actually named after a bear named Winnipeg. And, Winnipeg was a popular bear from Canada. And he was nicknamed Winnie. So, A. Milne named Winnie the Pooh after that bear. So, there you go. The name origin of Winnie the Pooh. Yeah, Winnie the Pooh was actually named after Winnipeg, Manitoba. Thought you never knew that. So anyway, but on the nightly news just before Wheel and Jeopardy, so the story was, and this is why I was so proud I did not do this podcast quite yet. It was because of the unfortunate news that was coming out of Hollywood. Netflix, and we've been talking about this for a couple weeks, Netflix has just announced they are no longer going to seek buying Warner Brothers. And so we started talking about this a few weeks ago. Warner Brothers is for sale. Okay, Warner Brothers Discovery. And so Netflix was going to pay like $80 billion for it. But then Paramount and Skydance, the company that bought Paramount not long ago, said, no, we're going to up the ante a little bit to, I think it was over $100 billion. So there was a bidding war for Warner Brothers. Netflix would have spun off the cable networks, which included the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, TBS, Turner Classic Movies, and Cartoon Network, and so on, and CNN to Discovery. There would, Discovery and Warner Brothers would break up, in other words. And the Warner Brothers studio, in its very priceless film library, would be included in the sale, which includes, of course, classics like Casablanca and The Wizard of Oz, and of course they have most of the pre-1986 MGM movies, and of course their own film library, which has Harry Potter and Batman, and it just goes on and on. So what happened was Warner Brothers. So this is what happened. So anyway, what happened was Netflix told Warner's one more final offer, and then they upped the ante to too much money, to the point that Netflix said it would be nice to have Warner Brothers, but it's not a necessity. So at the end of the day, Paramount and Skydance won, and people are now freaking out about this. Of course, the only good I see in this, now, here's the story. I should point out that the cable networks will be retained. So that way, in other words, CNN and Cartoon Network and the History Channel and TBS, they'll now join Paramount Skydance's cable networks, which include MTV, Nickelodeon, the Paramount Channel, and so on. So, personally, the only good I see in Paramount buying Warner Brothers is the fact that the Popeye film library, of course, Paramount made over 200 Popeye shorts from 1933 to 1957. They will be back in the hands of Paramount, because Paramount had to sell them in the 1950s to settle an antitrust suit. Now I'll probably talk a little bit more about that in a second. So the story goes like this. So what happened is that, but the bad news is, and this is very bad news, what will happen in the long run is the fact that Warner Brothers will, so the story is, so as we know, Paramount, Skydance, they are owned by, the family that started Oracle, the Ellisons. So what's going to happen is, so now what's going to happen, so this is what happened. They had to make a good promise with Donald Trump. And Donald Trump did not like Stephen Colbert, so of course we all knew what happened. Paramount went ahead and fired Stephen Colbert. His last show will be in May. And of course, they pulled the old, the official reason why he's fired, and the real reason why they're fired. the excuse was that, well, the show, the Late Show franchise was costing too much money and it wasn't pulling in the ratings. But here's the truth. The show was the number one program among all late night TV hosts. And it was making money. They're doing this because Stephen Colbert is critical of Donald Trump. And they pulled the same shit. And of course, the Trump regime pulled the same shit with Jimmy Kimmel. Of course, they've pretty much stayed away from Jimmy Fallon. And I think the reason why is because nobody watches Jimmy Fallon. Come on. Jimmy is too, he's trying to be too trendy. He stays away from politics. And, to me, it's like he's not bad, but it's too much of a little kid show comparing to, the other two guys, Kimmel and Colbert. But the reality is that we all saw what happened to CBS News. The two hosts of the CBS Evening News quit, Maurice Dubois and John Dickerson. John's mother was Nancy Dickerson. She was a longtime correspondent for CBS News. And, John, of course, and of course, Nancy pretty much passed the torch to her son. And he quit because he was pissed because of the lack of integrity that CBS now has under Barry Weiss, who is now the editor-in-chief. And, of course, Barry Weiss is a woman who's had this right-wing news site called the Free Press. CBS bought it out from her for $150 million, I think. And now, she's just this, she's a stupid-ass blogger. And I'm like, they might as well hire me to run CBS. I could probably do a better job than she could. And it's like, and of course, that's another thing. Barry Weiss went ahead and fucked up 60 Minutes. And of course, Anderson Cooper just announced that after 20 years, he will no longer be a part of CBS News. He's quitting. But, and of course, you got to realize what's going on. Anderson Cooper has a show on CNN, and guess what? It's like leaving your company for another company, and then they're like, surprise, we just bought him out. You're my bitch again. So I'm wondering if Anderson Cooper is thinking about quitting CNN too. I mean, seriously. So that's what scares me, folks. This is what happens when you put somebody like Donald Trump into the White House, and then you're like, well, back in the olden days, we had the Anti-Justice Department, step in and say, okay, you can't allow this to happen because, it's going to be a monopoly. But this is what happens when you put somebody like Donald Trump in charge. All the rules are thrown out the window. You got, merger after merger after merger, and people getting squeezed out. And I understand. It happened in my family. So the story was my uncle worked for Warner Brothers long time ago. And I was always jealous of him and my aunt because, they lived in Detroit. They lived outside Detroit, actually. They lived in Troy, a suburb. And what happened was my mom and my mom and dad were going through a tough divorce, and I had a tough school life, and too many times my parents would argue with me about the divorce, and my dad was basically telling me that everything, he never blamed himself for the divorce. And at the same time, my mom lied to me about her relationship with my, the soon-to-be stepdad. And, they both fucked up. And then I looked at my aunt and uncle. They really loved each other through thick and thin. And my they would, and it's like they gave their kids everything. They didn't they didn't punish them for everything like my parents did, because my parents were trying to tell me, basically give me the message that I was a fuck up, pretty much. So, long story short, my uncle worked for Warner Brothers. He would take his kids to concerts, meet, the kids got to meet famous artists. I got stuck in northern Michigan, meanwhile, where we were lucky to get maybe one good concert a year. Northern Michigan was just loaded with fucking old people and conservatives and assholes and religious nuts. And, it just made me want to get the fuck out of northern Michigan. Seriously. But then it happened. So my uncle, who worked for Warner Brothers, so this is what happened to him in 2001. Of course, Time Warner, which owned Warner Brothers at the time, he worked, my uncle worked in the record division. They merged with AOL, $150 billion merger. The merger turned into a total clusterfuck because nobody was buying internet from AOL anymore. And guess what happened? My uncle lost his job. And he ended up, he worked in radio for a while. He worked at a radio station in Detroit. He sold advertising for WNIC, the adult contemporary station. And he only sold 2 spots in 6 months, so they fired him. And so after that happened, he ended up, get this, he worked at Sam's Club. He worked at fucking Sam's Club for many years and hated it. And that's what mergers do, folks. They turn hardworking Americans into nobodies. Because my uncle now had fewer companies to work for. And I know part of the blame went on Napster. But then again, Harmony House was one of his big clients, and Harmony House had major financial difficulties even before Napster, and they went out of business. I remembered they had a bunch of stores in northern Michigan. They even had a store in downtown Traverse City. I mean, downtown Traverse City back in the day used to have some kick-ass music stores. There was New Moon Music. Oh, I loved New Moon. New Moon Music. New Moon Records. I love that store. They sold the latest CDs and tapes, but they also sold vinyl. Back in a time when vinyl wasn't cool. Yeah, people wanted to have, true high fidelity sound without the pops and the scratches and the hisses and the skips. But anyway, but you see, it was like for the next several years, my uncle and his wife were trying to keep their house. The house they owned was falling apart. There was a shed. They had a pole barn on their property. They had serious black mold, and the roof collapsed. And it's like, it became an eyesore, all because they were told to downsize, and they didn't want to. It was home to them. And I understand. My heart breaks for anybody who busts their ass off and then they get squeezed out of their job because of a fucking merger. Big corporations don't give a fuck about you or me or anyone else. And that's exactly what's going to happen if Warner Brothers gets sold to Paramount in Skydance. People are going to lose their jobs. And even worse, CNN is going to turn into another Trump network. And I'll bet you that if it does, the hardcore viewers of CNN will change the channel. But the hardcore Trumpers, the mega types, they're going to stick to their own brand, like Fox News or OAN or Newsmax. Because they grew up, these people, back in the 90s, they called CNN the Clinton News Network because of that fat fuck Rush Limbaugh. The point is, folks, is that Donald Trump is trying to win the media. And you and I are going to pay the price with less news on traditional media. We're going to, folks, it's like the internet is the only place anymore where we get to hear the truth. Because, the big three networks and Fox, they don't give a fuck. We need to worry about, why more and more of the Epstein files aren't being released. And why they're talking, this Epstein commission, whatever the fuck they are, they're only talking to the Clintons. And Bill Clinton did say today that he didn't see any problems with Epstein. He never saw anything illegal. Just wetting up my throat here. The point is, Donald Trump, and the sad truth is, now there's some redacted reports, and word has it that these redacted reports provide enough evidence that Donald Trump did indeed rape underage women. And I hope that, this whole, I'm wishing this blue wave will happen. I hope it happens this fall. The bluer the wave, the better. Just because they have a D after their name doesn't make them the best human beings on earth. Because there are some D's out there that are, they're basically Republican light. Some of them are for Project 2025. Some of them are for giving convicts guns. Some of them are anti-abortion or, so-called pro-lifers. That's who these people are. So let's get rid of these fuckers. And put the real, put the adults in for once. Who actually give a shit about you and me. But anyway, so you see, the point is, folks, is that we need to have an anti-justice department. We need to have, a department that will go after, that will stop with these mergers and monopolies. Because, unfortunately, that's what Trump wants. He loves it when companies merge. Because that means more positive word for him and him only. I mean, you see, folks, if this was a long time ago, it would never happen. True story. Back in I will say this. First of all, most studios in Hollywood have had some kind of merger in history. Of course, the most famous was 20th Century Fox. Now, speaking of Fox, back in 1929, one of the Fox in 20th Century Fox was a guy named William Fox. William started the Fox studio in 1915. He was originally from Hungary, I believe. His real name was Wilhelm Fuchs, Fuchs. And what happened was, in 1929, this is what happened. He tried to do a hostile takeover of MGM. And it turns out that MGM was a more powerful and mighty studio at the time. And Louis B. Mayer, the mayor in MGM, the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, he was the most powerful man in Hollywood. You did not want to fuck around with Louis B. Mayer. He called the Justice Department on Fox. And they were going to do an investigation on why Fox was trying to get MGM. Well, thankfully it never happened. And why was it? It was because Fox was involved in a very bad car accident. And he was laid up for a year. And while he was laid up, the stock market crash of 1929 happened, and he lost his studio. Fox suffered throughout the early 1930s. The only thing keeping Fox alive, pretty much, was Shirley Temple. Otherwise, a lot of Fox's films were bombs. And then what happened was that there was a studio that was formed by a former Warner Brothers executive named Darryl F. Zanuck. And Zanuck started this company called 20th Century Pictures. And the studio was doing quite well. They were using United Artists as their distributor, and the company took off like a rocket ship. And what had happened was Fox, so what happened was 20th Century knew of Fox's troubles. And they were like, they knew they were this tiny little indie studio, and they were like, let's go ahead and buy out Fox. And they did, 1935. And they allowed this deal to happen because by this point, Fox was on the verge of bankruptcy, I believe. So that's how 20th Century Fox came to be. But of course, guess what happened to Fox? Way back, so a couple of years ago, of course, as we all know, Rupert Murdoch was the owner of 20th Century Fox. He wanted to get out of the entertainment business and focus more on broadcasting and news. So he ended up selling 20th Century Pictures or 20th Century Studios to Disney, and they were required to drop the Fox from 20th Century Fox. So it was now 20th Century Studios. So there you go. And so basically, now that Disney and 20th Century are merged, you guessed it, that's one less major studio in Hollywood. And now that Paramount and Warner's are about to merge, you guessed it, another merger and one less studio in Hollywood. And that's not necessarily what theaters want. And I told you about the theater business right now. It's suffering due to way too many box office clunkers. And, it just goes on and on and on. So, you see, this is what Donald Trump wants. He wants to destroy the government and create less competition. And when there's less competition, you guessed it, and less companies, that means less workers. And where are people going to work after they lose their jobs? Well, my uncle learned the hard way. He ended up having to work at Sam's Club. And he hated it. And I don't blame him. And it's like, this is a guy with a college education and everything. And he ended up, working at Sam's Club. Now, his last job, by the way, was he was a substitute teacher. And tragically, sadly, he died a few years ago. He was 68 years old when he passed away. And, it's been 4 years now. Yeah, I can't believe he's gone. I mean, it's just not the same when I visit my aunt now. I miss my uncle. Great sense of humor, lots of good stories from him. But, the sad thing about, but here's what else happened. Going back to the Justice Department here. But I was going to say this. Under Trump, with him destroying the branches of our government and all the departments, it's like, and how ironic that right now the woman running the education department is Linda McMahon. Did you hear about what happened to Vince McMahon? Drove his fucking Bentley 100 miles an hour and crashed it into another car. And, ironically, there was a police officer right behind him who taped the whole thing. And it's like he was driving recklessly. It's like, what the fuck, man? Was he drunk as a skunk? Yeah, I guess he's on probation now. He can't drive for a while. And I'm like, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. Ugh. It's like, how many more people does he need to kill? Jesus Christ. So the Justice Department also stepped in the late 1940s. So the story was, Hollywood had a system. And the old system was a lot of the movies that got released into theaters were played at theaters that were owned by the studios. And what happened was then the small town, then it would move into the somewhat big towns and then the small towns. And sometimes movies would take months, maybe even a year or two, just to play it in a small town. All because back in those days, we didn't have multiplexes. There was no such thing as television. There was no such thing as streaming or videotape, none of that. And so what happened was, here's the story. The smaller theaters were upset that the Hollywood studios dictated on where movies got played and who could play them. So that's when the Justice Department stepped in and said, okay, we're going to break up the Hollywood system by telling the studios they could no longer own a theater. And everyone applauded. So anyway, the last two studios in Hollywood, I think, better yet, so Warner Brothers and Paramount paid hefty fines because they were all given a window on when they had to sell their theaters, and they waited too long. So they had to pay fines, and that was why they ended up selling their film libraries to various people. That's where, earlier I was telling you about Popeye. Paramount will now own the Popeye library again for the first time in some 70 years because they sold the Popeye library originally to a firm called Associated Artists Productions, which later was sold to United Artists, and then United Artists sold to MGM, and then Ted Turner took over the library, and so on. So that's why Warner Brothers owns the Popeye shorts. But then again, Warner Brothers sold all their films pre-1948 to this company, Associated Artists. You see, back in the day, Hollywood, the government cared about us and protected us from big, greedy corporations. But under the Trump regime, the tables turned big time. And now Trump is championing this merger between Paramount and Warner Brothers, all because he wants to kill CNN. It's plain and simple. He will allow this. And unfortunately, we, the people, will have to, eat our crow. But then again, here's another thing that does worry me as a longtime fan of Mad Magazine. So, the story was that, Time Warner, part of the reason why they got rid of Time from their name was because they spun off all their magazines, except for one, and that was Mad, because Mad was actually under the DC Comics canon. So what happened was, to this date, Warner Brothers still owns Mad, but they've really cut back in the last several years. First of all, they used to sell Mad at stores. Now you can only go to comic book shops and get Mad. And for a while, they were knocking down new content. And they stopped with that for a while, but then there was a demand for new content, and so they brought it back. And they brought back a lot of their OG cartoonists to do so, and writers like Tom Richmond and Sergio Aragones and a few others. Well, then, so anyway, what happened was, but yeah, I noticed in last month's issue there was some fewer newer pages. Yeah, normally Sergio puts in an article every month, but I didn't see one. Excuse me. But yeah, bear in mind, you got to remember, Sergio is like pushing 90. Anyway, so the rest of the story here is that it does worry me that they're going to go ahead and try to put Mad out of its misery. Because, I think that's the Ellison situation. They want to get rid of every piece of pro-democracy, anything regarding the company. And Mad has done a wonderful job over the years of, using parody to make us laugh. And of course, point the fingers at presidents and politicians when they need it. You understand? And anyway, and speaking of Justice Department stuff, so, you got to remember, now this was what I was going to talk about yesterday. Television. So, under the federal laws, under the FCC, you can own 2 AM stations, 7 FM stations, and when it comes to television, it varies from market to market. So if you're in a top 100 market, you can own 2 TV stations, but only one of them could be a top 4 station: ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox. And the other station has to be either independent or with a smaller network like My Network TV or the CW. But in a smaller market like Traverse City, where I'm from, and I always like to use Traverse City as an example, of course, only one per market. One owner per market for TV. So the story was, when Telecommunications Act of 1996 was passed, Traverse City was and still is a 4-station market. The NBC affiliate is WPBN TV7 in Traverse City and WTOM TV4 in Sheboygan, aka 7 and 4. 7 and 4 in 1996 was owned by a firm called Raycom, based out of Alabama. The CBS affiliate is WWTV Channel 9 Cadillac Traverse City and WWUP-TV Channel 10 in Sault Ste. Marie. And it was owned by a guy named Mario Iacobelli and his firm, Heritage Broadcasting. The ABC affiliate is ABC 29 and 8, WGTU 29 Traverse City, WGTQ TV 8 Sault Ste. Marie. And the Fox affiliate, Fox, back then was known as Fox 33, WGKI, no and in their name, but they had a bunch of translator stations, so they were now known as Northern Michigan's Fox. And that station was WGKI 33 in Cadillac, along with a few translator stations in WGKU Channel 45 in Vanderbilt by Gaylord. And that station was owned by Gary Knapp. So only one station in Northern Michigan was not locally owned, and that was 7 and 4. And Raycom, being a chain state, being a big corporation, they really dumped a lot of money into 7 and 4. I will admit that their 7 and 4 was one of the higher quality stations up north, comparing to the other stations in terms of graphics and stuff like that. God, do I love water. I just hope that Trump doesn't go out and destroy it. Anyway, so the rest of the story was these companies owned the big 4 stations in town. So after Telecom 96, it wasn't just Northern Michigan, but a lot of markets found ways to get around the laws. And one of the things that they did was they discovered that, yes, the FCC said no to multi-ownership, but they said yes to something called shared service agreements, meaning that, yes, a TV station cannot own 2 stations in the market, but they could pay they could actually operate a station. They can't own it. So I think what happened was Mario Iacobelli found out that maybe if he paid a friend of his from Arizona, because Mario had property out there, to own Fox 33, it could happen. So the story was Gary Knapp sold Fox 33 to a company called Rockfleet Broadcasting, based out of New York City back in late 90s. And under the agreement, they had to change the call sign to WFQX, which is, there's an ambulance going by. So WFQX was the new call sign for Channel 33. But Rockfleet was not doing well. As a matter of fact, Rockfleet made headlines because they owned the ABC affiliate in Bangor, Maine, WVII Channel 7. And during a newscast, the whole station walked out because they weren't paying their workers jack shit. So Rockfleet was having major financial difficulties, and so this is what happened. Mario paid a friend of his from Arizona named Alex Balea. I found a picture of Mario and Alex playing golf together on Mario's, or is it Alex's Facebook page. So they're buddies. So Mario paid Alex to be a mole, if you will. Basically paid him to be a shadow corporation, if you will, called Cadillac Telecasting. And what happened was, about 20 years ago, they created this fake company to take over Fox 33 from Rockfleet. So that's what happened. They moved Fox 33 studios into 910s on Fetzer Hill and Mount Fetzer in Cadillac. And near Cadillac, I should say. It's actually by Tustin. So that's what happened. And that's part of the reason why they moved into that giant studio off 131. It was because they couldn't fit 2 TV stations in there. And of course, now both, of course, they moved to Channel 32. Fox 33 moved to Channel 32 during the digital switchover. So now they have that tiny building in Traverse City in that really itty-bitty little studio. Oh, my God. So now, of course, Mario has since passed away. So now the Iacobelli family owns those 2 stations. So, and then it happened to 7 and 4 in 29 and 8. So, first of all, 7 and 4 was sold by Raycom to a firm called Barrington Broadcasting. And 29 and 8 was sold by Tom Scanlon, who also had an ABC affiliate in Marquette. Yeah, some people credit Scanlon for making the Marquette television market very modern, because up until the mid-90s, they were a 2-station market, and Channel 3 was always rebroadcasting whatever Channel 5 had in Green Bay because they were co-owned. And Channel 6, well, had to shoehorn all the other networks into their schedule. So it was a mess for many years. So what happened was the West Michigan, West Upper UP, Upper Peninsula, they lost ABC because Channel 6 went full-blown NBC. I think they had to sign an exclusive agreement. So he signed on Channel 5 from Calumet and eventually Channel 10 from Marquette. So things got very modern all of a sudden. Anyway, so this is what happened. Tom Scanlon decided after he built Channel 10 and got it off and running, he sold his stations and retired. He eventually passed away. And Scanlon sold 29 and 8 to a firm called Max Media out of Virginia. Max Media was co-owned by Tim Robertson, the son of Pat Robertson, the fucking televangelist from the 700 Club. I hated Pat Robertson. The only good thing I can say about Pat is that he's dead. Good grief. The guy was a dick. Biggest cocksucker in the history of television, in my opinion. But, 29 and 8 had a long history of airing shitty religious shows, too. They also had Kenneth Copeland on at one point. They also had the PTL Club. Yeah, as a matter of fact, they preempted the Family Feud in the 70s for that terrible show. Number 1 show in daytime TV, and they preempted Richard Dawson kissing a bunch of girls for, these 2 assholes, Jim and Tammy Faye, grifting money from people. Ugh, God. I hate televangelists, and even worse, the people who support them. So the rest of the story. So Max Media apparently had major financial flaws, and they were looking to sell. And then 7 and 4 was for. So the story was they were owned by Raycom, company out of Alabama. Raycom, I guess, had financial problems, because they bought up a bunch of stations and they wanted to sell them. So 7 and 4 was sold to a firm called Barrington Broadcasting. And they owned 7 and 4 for a couple of years. And they were looking to buy 20. So they were looking at 9 and 10. And, the thing with 9 and 10 and Fox 33. And they were like, we can try to do the same with 29 and 8 because it looks like they're for sale. So they made a deal with Max. So this is what happened. They found a company called Tucker Broadcasting. And Tucker was in the business of owning TV stations, but not operating them. So they allowed this SSA between 29 and 8 and 7 and 4. 29 and 8 moved from their itty-bitty little studio in downtown Traverse City on top of an old bank building way over to 7 and 4's studio on M72. So now 7 and 4 and 29 and 8 were one big happy family, and so was 9 and 10 and Fox 32. And then came Sinclair. Barrington was up for sale, and Sinclair had the bucks to buy 7 and 4. They bought 7 and 4, and through their shell company, they purchased 29 and 8 as well. So that meant that poor old 7 and 4 now had to shoehorn right-wing bullshit into their newscasts. And, you know, and of course, I told you the story about Sinclair. Sinclair is a publicly traded company that's run by the Smith family. Sinclair, by the way, was named after the Smiths' father, Julian Sinclair Smith. So what happened was but then they had another company called, I forgot the name of the company, but basically they started this company to be a shell company to Sinclair. And that company, Cunningham Media, was actually named after the Smiths' mother in her maiden name. So that's what happened. But to the eyes of the Federal Communications Commission, Cunningham and Sinclair are not the same company, because Sinclair is publicly traded and Cunningham is not. So what happened was the FCC said, no biggie. We'll just slap on an SSA for whatever markets they need to control. So now with Trump in the White House and no anti-justice department or whatever it is, the FCC basically has decided, okay, we can break the rules and create more monopolies in these markets. So now Sinclair has been, so the FCC has declared that Sinclair can technically own 29 and 8. Not just 29 and 8, but stations in other markets as well. They were looking to, same shit in Flint Tri-Cities. They converted WEYI Channel 25. It was actually owned by a guy named Armstrong Williams and his firm called Howard Stirk Holdings. Howard Stirk, by the way, Stirk, not Howard Stern. Howard Stirk was the maiden names of his parents, I think. And what happened was so now 25 is owned by Sinclair, and so is Fox 66. And they kind of sweetened the deal by moving the NBC programming of 25 over to 66.2, even though they are identified still as NBC 25. But they're doing this because, they are trying to play with the rules, but here's the situation. Up in northern Michigan, you got 4 TV stations, but only 2 companies owning the stations. And it's sad because that means less choices for everybody in northern Michigan, although some would complain that before these duopolies happened, 29 and 8 was a shitty station, and so was Fox 32. And, and the question is, who would you rather have? A right-wing company like Sinclair or another right-wing company called, Max Media, that's actually owned by the son of an evil televangelist? And, of course, it's almost like asking, what do you like better, AIDS or cancer? And you don't want it. It's like none of the above. You want a company that actually cares about their viewers, that provides a newscast that tells the truth and provides all the important news stories people need to hear. And if they piss off a few folks, a few advertisers, so let be. That's another reason why newscasts suck. They refuse to tell a few stories because of the fact is, sometimes, yes, you got to piss off a few folks to entertain others. That's the way it is. And that's what happens when you have somebody like Trump in the White House. You have these duopolies. And now it's happening here in Grand Rapids. Earlier this week, Susan Shaw, longtime news anchor at Wood TV8, announced that, which is NBC here in Grand Rapids, she announced that she's retiring after 40 years in the business and 32 at Wood TV8. And while all this is going on, now she says that, she wants to be with her family. She and her husband just bought a house on the lakeshore. Her mom's getting up there in age and she wants to be with her and so on and so on and so on. So what's going on? But at the same time, Nexstar, which owns Channel 8, they're firing a lot of people. They're laying off folks. They just laid off a bunch of folks from their stations in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. And in Chicago, they just let go Dean Richards, who was a longtime news entertainment reporter for WGN Channel 9. He had been there since 1994. And I'm wondering that they're looking at Grand Rapids, and the problem is that you got two newsrooms here in GR. You got that they're trying to, of course, we've been talking about the Nexstar and Tegna merger. Nexstar owns Wood TV8, and they also have ABC 40, Channel 41, WOTV, while Tegna has the other ABC affiliate, WZZM 13. There's two ABCs in Grand Rapids because of old-timey FCC rules that applied to Channel 13 and 41. As a matter of fact, it's only one of a handful of markets here in America where, there's two of one network. And it's all because of real estate and other factors. So what's going on is that we don't know what's happening at Nexstar. Chances are Nexstar is going to kill WZZM 13. And some folks from 13 will move to 8, and some people at 8 and 13 will be squeezed out. So that means that if you want to watch news in Grand Rapids in West Michigan, your choices will go down to Wood TV8, Fox 17, and of course there's a rumor going around that Sinclair wants to buy Fox 17's parent, which is Scripps, and of course the station that Sinclair owns here in Grand Rapids in Kalamazoo, WWMT Channel 3, and WZZM 13, which is actually in either third place or in dead last in the ratings, and it shows, there's going to be a few folks who will probably end up losing their jobs. I mean, I watched Channel 13 recently. They suck. I agree they suck. And the point is that, some people are like, well, it's a good thing they're gone. But the bad news is they'll be going away. But you got to realize that human beings work there. They got families. And I told you the story about my uncle who worked at Warner Brothers. He was heartbroken. And so was the family. And even me, because he used to give me free CDs all the time. He was a good guy. Or even tickets to rock concerts. My uncle actually took me to my first rock concert, AC/DC, at the Palace of Auburn Hills, 1996. It was one of the happiest days of my life. it because, rock bands don't usually play in northern Michigan since Castle Farms disappeared, went out of business. The point, folks, is with Donald Trump in charge, he will allow the rules to be broken. He already broke one giant rule already, and that was, the tariffs. We all knew what happened. The Supreme Court jumped in and said, no can do, Donnie. Knock it off. You're hurting American families. Period. And now he wants to ruin the broadcasting business and the entertainment business and cause less studios to be in business. And I know there's independents out there, and of course there's Netflix. And we'll see what will happen if this merger will happen. But that's the story, folks. And we need to be worried. I understand more and more Americans are leaving cable TV and going with internet services and streaming. I'm happy for people like the Masilas brothers and the Midas Touch Network that they've created. They've done a human's job of creating a service that's crucial to the American people. And, we need to worry. We can't just turn on the TV and say, oh, so-and-so's got a good plan. That Perry Johnson, he's got the 47-47 plan. Of course, Johnson's a royal ass licker to Trump. Oh, Mike Duggan, he helped to rebuild Detroit. So, if he was a Democrat, why are the Republicans supporting his campaign? I'll tell you why. It's because they love it when the Democrats are broken between the moderates and the true progressives. And guess what? That means more power to the Republicans. And by the way, even though Perry Johnson is a ass licker to Trump is supporting another Republican. I'm trying to remember his name. Big fat black guy. Yeah, I'm not good with names today. But I'm sorry, folks. People gotta learn. People gotta be educated. People gotta learn. Because at the end of the day, when people lose their jobs over somebody's bullshit, over because of mergers and acquisitions, we all hurt at the end of the day. And, let's face it, my uncle never recovered from losing his job at Warner Brothers. And, it broke his heart. And, I look at myself and I'm thankful that my company's actually looking for workers. And I hope they do. I mean, they've treated me very well for the last 13 or so years after my ex-boss was bought out and was forced to retire. Of course, the guy was a total asshole and nobody misses him. Yeah, as a matter of fact, we had a pizza party at my shop the other day and we talked about the bad old days with my ex-boss. And I heard, I heard a whole bunch of terrible stories about how he used to manipulate people by hiring people with no experience to do the job. And he loved to tell people, well, monkey can do it. Yeah, then how come you almost bankrupted our company, asshole? Just another fucking Jesus freak who makes me proud that I don't go to church on Sunday. And that's how I look at Trumpers, the mega cucks who just want to step up and tell you and me that he's doing a good job. Just leave him alone. Then how come during the first term in office, his first term, 1 million people died of COVID? And we lost a lot of money. And we're allowing this to happen again because, a lot of it stemmed from, men being bullied by these bro talkers who love to say, yeah, if you vote for Kamala, you must be gay. Of course, they'll probably use another terminology. But that's how it is. It's manipulation. It's gaslighting. And, it's wrong. I mean, if Kamala Harris was our president today, none of this shit would be going on. And, we, the American people, need to be tougher than this. But then again, I agree. The Democrats became too corporate. And I know, of course, Hillary Clinton was interviewed yesterday because of Epstein. But, let's remember something, folks. This is what's wrong with America. Let's remember what Hillary did to get the Democratic nomination in 2016, not Bernie Sanders. But still, we need to be better as human beings for a better country because, look, I hate it when companies merge. I hate it when people lose jobs. Yes, you got Pam Bondi screaming, 50,000 Dow. No. Folks, when I hear that phrase, when I hear about 50,000 in the Dow Jones, it makes me think, well, Hitler built the Autobahn. Remember that. So, knock it off already. Period. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and enjoy my weekend. I'm out of here, folks. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Get some relaxation. Enjoy this day if you're here in Michigan. 50 fucking degrees. I'm going to go out. I'm actually at a grocery store right now. I got to actually get eggs. So, I'll talk to you later. Good day and good luck. Bye-bye for now.